just the amount of like 3-word combinations I haven't read. So you put in whatever you put into Google to find your house.
I think I thought.
Okay, so then what we want to do is find your exact door. Alright, so where is the end? Okay. What's your options?
Because I have 5 views.
So you've probably got 6 that you can choose, so you just need the map and the list. My old house was slug lines bucket. My new one's not as good. My new one is cover cans drum. My favourite was about how to be as good as possible, which I really liked. Imagine a little banana with this. Yes, much better, much better. It's just the cute thing. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Transport Innovation Talks. Thank you all for getting up early this morning after the presidency reception last night. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope you've had a good first day at our annual summit, and I hope you're enjoying Leipzig. Today we're here at the Transport Innovation Talks with 4 speakers. We're going to look at what's happening in mobility. So in the startup arena, there's quite a lot happening. Never before have we had such a platform for transport. Never before have we had so much investment in transportation. And the 4 speakers today will talk about the areas that they're involved in. Each will stand up and give a PowerPoint presentation, followed by a couple of questions. And at the end, we'll have time for a Q&A with the audience. So the first speaker this morning, I'd just like to introduce the panel first of all. So here on my left, we have Luis Miranda Moreno. Luis is the co-founder and chief scientist of Brisk Synergies. Louise has extensive experience in the field of road safety and transport and has participated in many projects with various transportation agencies and cities, such as the US National Cooperative Highway Research Programme, Transport Canada, Mexico Communications and Transport Ministry, and the cities of Toronto, Montreal, and New York. Beside Louise is Claire. Claire Jones is the Global Partnerships Director for What 3 Words, where she leads the global expansion of What 3 Words. She is interested in how innovative business models can tackle social and environmental challenges, and Claire has a background in development and growth of social enterprises and impact investment, which I hope she's going to tell us a little bit about. Beside Claire is Robin Chase. So everyone else is here for the first time except Robin, who's been here for a number of times. So Robin is a transportation entrepreneur. She's the founder and former CEO of Zipcar, the largest car-sharing company in the world. She's also the founder and chairman of Venium, a vehicle communications company building the networking fabric for the Internet of Moving Things. So first up to give us our presentation, today we'll call on, and Philip von Hagen, is the executive board member of Porsche SE, a listed holding company and majority voting shareholder of Volkswagen AG. So Porsche SE also owns the PTV Group and is shareholder in Inrix. Following 17 years in investment banking, Philippe joined Porsche SE and is responsible for investment management. So I hope you give them all a warm welcome and a round of applause. And first up on stage this morning is Robin, who's going to talk to us about the role of transportation infrastructure and how technology is completely and rapidly transforming it, and where we should be looking for and encouraging more startups. Thank you, Robin.
Good morning. So I feel like I'm going to give some context to innovations that have been happening, are happening, and should happen. So I think about infrastructure is destiny. And so what we're building today really does predict our future. So when we built in America, Levittown, these dispersed suburban towns, and then we built our national highway system, when we built the one and the other, we knew where we were going. Our infrastructure is our destiny. We are going towards this incredible congestion and obese Americans. That the one led to the other. Once we built out there with cars, this is what was going to happen. In the Netherlands, they've chosen 40 years of cycle-friendly infrastructure, which took a while to build. And so if we look at how many kilometers people in the Netherlands ride versus the US, and the impact on obesity rates is dramatic because of that infrastructure is destiny. So I was thinking a lot about what is our personal infrastructure, our human nature, what is built into us. And I think we strongly favor easy and cheap things. Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize in economics, wrote a wonderful book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and he points out that our knee-jerk reaction is to do the fast, simple, straightforward thing. And so I think, here's my beautiful picture of us straight away, we want to do the easiest, cheapest things. So if we layer that into our options today, over the last 100 years, we have specifically and proactively made personal cars easy and cheap. And I think of this as our economic infrastructure. These taxes and these regulations that have made cars easy and cheap are our destiny for car consumption. And so we have underpriced air pollution, we've underpriced congestion, we've underpriced curb access and parking, and in my country in particular, we've underpriced the user fees to build our transportation infrastructure. So with this wrong market signals, we consume based on the market signals we are getting. We all overconsume personal car transport. And then I want to just touch on our planetary infrastructure, which is probably our most profound and important infrastructure that is destiny. This is, globally, is this year hotter or colder than the 20th century average? And if you've been born since 1980, you have never experienced a cooler than average year for the planet. This is 2015, this is 2016, this is 2017, and you can see we've already warmed the planet by almost 1 degree. Scientists are telling us that we're going to have plus 5 or 6 degrees centigrade by 2100 under business as usual. But if you're like me, what does it feel like to warm a planet by 5 degrees centigrade? How can I even begin to imagine that? So I did some research, and the last time it was minus 4.5 degrees centigrade was the last ice age. And here where we are in Leipzig and where I sleep in Boston was under several kilometers of ice. And so these are skylines of these cities under kilometers of ice. And so where I sleep in Boston was under 1.5 kilometers of ice. So if you want to know what does it feel like to warm a planet by 4.5 degrees, that is the difference between that and today. And we are going forward that amount in 85. So of the things that are really important for us to think about as we build, as we create infrastructure that is our destiny, this is our most profoundly important one. So this underpricing we found our limits on cars. So if you look at the left side, these are the world's most congested cities, and what is really striking is that most of us who experience congestion and feel like life is, our highways are congested, are not in the top 10 cities of most congested. And on the right, 23% of the world's emissions come from transport. So when we come to technology, technology has enabled this huge transformation in the sector. And I think of it, so I made this explosive thing. So it's technology that has enabled car sharing and ride sharing and the transit apps and on-demand consumption, electric batteries, autonomous and connected vehicles. And I think of the city infrastructure has completely transformed because urban mobility is the center of this universe. All of the things that are within in a city, land use and buildings, government revenues, employment, energy, environment, and the business sector all rely on this urban mobility, which is now in a huge state of flux. I feel like the tectonic plates are in motion. And policy is the holding of that city ecosystem. Policy, our tax and regulations is what shapes those things, as we all know. And one would hope that this policy is based on the public benefit, the public good. And so I quite like this chart because I've been doing transportation for years, and transportation is at the center of the universe, and on the other side, the foundation is the public good held by these taxes and regulations. So technology has made sharing easy. I could do Zipcar because of it. So it was because of technology that we could do car sharing and make renting a car as simple as owning your own. It's because of open data that we now have transit apps, so I can take a bus in a city where I never knew where to get on or off. And it's technology that has made the e-hailing and ride sharing possible, and that we can actually have ride matches in a city, which before was unthinkable, but it's technology that's making that possible. Going back to my idea about things being cheap and easy, this was based on data for e-hailing in the US. What would you do if e-hailing and ride-sharing did not exist? 25% of the people used to walk or bike, and because of e-hailing, they are not. That is a shocking number. Back to my idea about human nature, that we fall back on the easiest, cheapest thing. And so this, just thinking about going forward, what the implications of this are. It's also made on-demand consumption and delivery easy and convenient, which we're all loving, which has huge consequences for what cities look like if we don't have retail, and for the drop-off and pick-up demands for roadside. And in 2000, we had 1% of retail was online. Last year, it was 16%, and it's supposed to be going towards 60% by 2030. So just think of that dramatic transformation in your cities and in the curb use as we go forward. And then you enter self-driving cars, and I'm just going to slip by this, just the impact of that on this. A video I'm not going to show because I don't have enough time, but I urge you to go look at is to Google on YouTube, Robin Chase self-driving cars, and I lay out this vision of possibility, two possible paths for the future, heaven and hell with self-driving cars, depending on whether we take proactive approaches or whether we sit and wait and let it play out. So if we understand that people naturally choose easy and cheap, and that infrastructure is destiny, and that autonomous vehicles are honestly imminent. In San Francisco, Waymo will be probably putting them out on the road this year without anyone in the front seat. That's a real city with no one in the front seat. So the implications over the next 5 years, we have to specifically and proactively change the economic infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, and the data infrastructure to favor active and shared transport if we want to have healthy cities which are livable and delightful to live in. We have to make those things easy and cheap versus the last 100 years where we've made private cars easy and cheap. And just to enunciate this, 75% of our vehicles, as we know, are single occupancy. 45% of trips are bikeable because they're less than 6.5 kilometers. 15% are walkable because they're less than 2.5 kilometers. And so again, we have to focus on making active and shared transport easier and cheap, and we get these benefits. I want to highlight, a year ago, I pulled together 10 of the world's largest city and transport NGOs, and I said, let's come up with what are the principles that every stakeholder can be following to make cities livable from a transport perspective. And these are called the Shared Mobility Principles for Livable Cities. And we wrote them such that every stakeholder can sign on to them. So obvious things, plan cities and mobility together, and then more challenging ones. Number 7, seek fair user fees across all modes. Since we launched this in November of last year, we've now asked private sector companies to start signing up. And so we've had the private sector passenger service companies that have signed up now are transporting more than 100 million people every day. And I just want to go through a few of these, and we're, C40 will be approaching the cities that it works with. We're trying to get governments to sign up so that we're all aligned to the same vision of what makes a great city from a transport perspective, so we all know where we are going. We're all in agreement. Because when these tectonic plates solidify, we need them to be on the right side of making livable, sustainable, and just cities. And if we don't have a very solid vision, who knows how it will play out. So just to talk about a few of these. Number 2, move people, not cars, very obvious. Number 3, encourage efficient use of space and assets. These are very famous slides in the transport sector. You know, what does the space required to move 60 people by car, by bus, by bicycle? On Twitter, I found this really amusing one, which was, here it is by car, here it is with Uber, here it is with autonomous vehicle. If we do not change the underlying economics and start forcing people from an economic standpoint to choose other modes or to get more people in those vehicles, nothing changes. And from an air quality perspective, also nothing changes. So just thinking autonomous vehicles are going to do things for us, they are not unless we have many other associated policies. And just again, oh my gosh, look at that street. It is so incredibly crowded. We have to build an elevated highway, widen those lanes. This is what it looks like statistically. So next time you're on a congested highway, just imagine everyone sitting there. So here's another approach to this. This is Market Street in San Francisco, where they took the street allocation and they redid what used to be all allocated to personal vehicles. The red is only for buses, and they're moving 60 people per lane block. The green for bikes, and they're moving 40 people per lane block. And of course, private cars are moving 12 people per lane block. So these are ways that we can get at this, and we have to make this transformation to make active and shared modes the preferred. So fair user fees across all modes is one of my favorite. As I said, today cities seem to express ambivalence. You know, Robin, ride your bike, which is 0 emissions and small footprint, or drive your own minivan that's 25 years old and you never maintain. We as a city don't care. We're not sending you any different price signals. Similarly, I can take my own car, or I can get into a bus with 30 other people. We don't care. Cities are saying it all is the same to us, when we know that is not the case. So we really need to rewrite. We need to make fair user fees across all modes. We need to make vehicles pay their fair share in this system for space. So the future of transportation really should be multimodal in cities, with a continuum of shared transport, a continuum ranging from metros up to a personal a taxi that you would rent. And we need to have standard open data among that. So number 8 is public benefits via open data. And we must have this public data via open data because we need interoperability between modes, and we need competition within modes. If you don't have open data, you just end up with monopolies. There's no mapping standards for curb and lane use, another piece of this open data that has to get done. Number 9, work towards integration and seamless connectivity. If right now, as we do smart traffic lights and smart street lights, we're putting in their Wi-Fi and cellular, and we're not putting in the thing that connects vehicles. So dedicated short-range communications, or 802.11p is a piece of spectrum. So just recognizing that when we start thinking about wireless, we have to bring vehicles into that wireless spectrum. And if we're digitizing the entire transport sector, we have to make sure that everyone has access to it. So the digital divide is a really critical thing to make sure that everyone has access as we're moving to a digitized space. So to conclude, today we have this unique and irreplaceable window of opportunity, a chance to do over cities. And why do we have this irreplaceable chance? Because autonomous vehicles are providing a concrete and visible timeline for action, where climate change seems kind of removed and people aren't quite grasping that. I want to say we have to fix this underpricing before autonomous vehicles come in. We have this opportunity to refresh our vehicle stock to ones that has zero emission instead of what we have today. And there are this host of focusing problems. There is no stakeholder in our economy that's not going to be impacted by this. So they're all paying attention. Let's rewrite the rules to get the future that we want. This is just for inspiration. This is in Seoul, a very famous highway project. It used to look like this. The mayor of Seoul said, you know what, I want to become president one day, and I'm going to do this unbelievable project, which is he ripped off all of that highways and uncovered the river beneath that had been buried. And so this is a spectacular place. It's called the Chungcheon Highway, and he did become president on the back of this project. And so infrastructure is destiny. We have to get this transition right. It's not as if the status quo is fantastic. And I invite you to join this collaborative initiative that is yet unnamed that I'm working on, that is going to bind all of the worlds and all of the stakeholders to focus on this one future vision of great cities that we need to get ahead and to use this disruption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. And I think you raised a very, very interesting point. What makes a great city from a transport perspective? And I hope that all of you have enjoyed that. We're looking forward to hearing Luis Moreno speak. He's up next, Luis from Brisk Synergies. And in terms of what Robin has said, I think what makes a city great from a transport perspective, certainly safety has to come in there. So it's interesting now to hear from Luis how what they're doing can bring that into the city perspective.
I will talk about our solutions for road safety analysis using automated video analytics. And I will try to explain you how we are trying to help cities to, in a proactive way, look at the safety problem. So we are a software company that actually, as I mentioned, is trying to transform video data into knowledge for safety analysis. And by safety analysis, I mean the diagnosis of problems at intersections at the streets, or the evaluation of projects that cities are implementing, or like identification of hazardous locations. And so we are based in Canada. We have 2 offices in Waterloo and Montreal. And then we are trying to help transportation authorities, municipalities, consulting firms. I mean, we don't have to talk about the big dimension of the problem. Every year, more than 50 million of people are injured in our roads. And obviously, this has also a big economical consequence in addition to the social cost. To deal with this problem, cities are trying to implement actions, plans, programs, and they are always trying to transform our streets, our intersections, so that we can have better safety standards. And however, we are still relying in crash data. So, you know, we are trying to justify projects on those intersections in which some accidents have happened. So we are looking at hazardous locations, dangerous locations, then we do some interventions, and then we try to evaluate the impacts of these projects. So this is the traditional approach. But this approach will take us usually between 4 and 6 years. So it's a quite long and reactive approach. So to justify projects, we need accidents to happen. So, and in addition to that, obviously we know that in many countries, in particularly in low-income countries, crash data is quite deficient. So there is a lot of issues with underreporting, or sometimes even does not exist. So how can we deal with this issue in another way? So instead of waiting for accidents to happen, which fortunately they happen only few, and this is why it takes us so much time to justify projects. We are looking at at risk. We are looking at a proactive approach using video analytics tools, and in this case, we are looking at near misses or dangerous behaviors that we can observe constantly, and we can actually react before accidents happen. So, and this is sort of what we are trying to do. So we are looking at conflicts and situations that we can observe in our daily life, and when we go to work or when we go to pick up our kids or in our daily life, right? So these kind of situations, you can observe them constantly, but now the challenge, how can we measure them in an automated way and constantly in our cities? So now, thanks to the emerging technologies, we are able to do that. So, and we have also many years of research in surrogate safety analysis, and we are looking at different measures that we can actually just automate. So we have some measures like, for instance, post-encroachment time, time to collision, which basically these measures are just taking into account the proximity at which the road users get into interactions and the speeds at which they are traveling, so how close they get. And obviously, we're able to measure that in different ways, taking into account the speeds and taking into account the masses, the size of the road users. So now, how can we do that in an automated way? So basically, we are using computer vision and artificial intelligence techniques so that we are able to detect all the road users in a facility that we want to analyze. So in this case, we want to detect and classify pedestrian, bicycles, motorcycles, vehicles classified by truck, buses, small vehicles. So when we detect and classify each road user, we are able to track and determine their trajectory, and we have the vector of speeds at which they are moving in the facility. And after that, we are able to detect in an automated way the trajectories and the interactions and measure the level of risk of each of those interactions based on the proximity measures and the speed measures. And then these data can be used for many purposes in safety analysis, such as, again, the diagnosis and the monitoring of safety or the evaluation of projects. So these are some of our client cities that already are using our technologies, and I will try to give you some examples of how they have been used in these technologies. And And before that, I give you some examples. I just want to mention that we have two products, basically. So the first product is that, in this case, we just install cameras in places where we don't have cameras. So we install cameras in a temporal way. So you can install and collect video data for 1 week of data, and do the post-processing, analyze the video data in an automated way using video cameras. We can also use drones, and just basically give the results to the city in 1 week, right? So instead of waiting years to have a diagnosis about the safety, the level of safety of an intersection of a street or a road, we are able to run a safety diagnosis in question of 2 weeks, right? So using this product that we call Breeze Lumina. Also, we have another solution that in this case, basically, we have, in the case when we have fixed cameras that are already in place, infrastructure that is already in place, we can just tap directly to these cameras and continuously analyze all this video data that sometimes even cities are not using for any other purpose than just looking at traffic conditions. So this video data is analyzed in a continuous and automated way constantly, and based on that, actually, we can monitor safety over time. And obviously, these solutions that we have developed are platform-based solutions, so you can access all the results in the cloud, so you can access all this information about where the conflicts are happening, what is the high concentration of conflicts, like a heat map, or like what is the severity, the speeds, the volumes. We can generate a set of indicators that cities can use for the diagnosis or the evaluation of contrameasures. We also, obviously, if cities have few cameras, so they can start monitor a set of intersections and have some index, a road safety index, that tell us what is the most dangerous intersection in which they have to do some interventions. So just to explain you with a couple of examples, how does it work? So for instance, this is a small project for the city of Toronto in which they have been installing curve extensions, what we call curve extensions. So, you know, these roads that were built a long time ago, we have very large turning radius. So a lot of North American cities now are reducing the turning radius so that actually they reduce the crossing distance for pedestrians, and at the same time they reduce the vehicle speeds. So the intersections, theoretically, they will improve in safety. However, we have very little evidence. All these kind of treatments are new, relatively new, so it has been taking so much time to build some evidence. What is the impact of these treatments? So now with this kind of tools, we're able to determine the impacts in question of weeks. Right? So we do a before and after that in the traditional approach will take you 4 or 6 years. Now, in a question of weeks, we are able to install a camera before the construction happens. After the construction, we install a couple of weeks, few days, the cameras again, and we can run a diagnosis and evaluate the improvements of the projects and the interventions. So immediately we can understand what are the impacts. We can also evaluate technologies. For instance, in this case, for the city of Winnipeg, they are testing different type of flashing lights for pedestrian crossings at mid-crosswalks. So they have flashing lights that are mounted and flashing lights just in a side, or like the frequency of the flashes. So we can test and immediately have an answer. What is how the drivers are reacting to these different devices that we are installing to protect pedestrians. So instead of, again, waiting for many years of accidents to see what is going on, what are the benefits of these technologies, we can immediately observe what are the impacts. And this is another example, the same thing now in North America. We are building roundabouts. This is new in some cities. Some drivers are getting used to that. So we are able to constantly monitor what is the driving adaptation to these new type of facilities that we are building, and what are the issues that can be generated. For instance, this intersection, this roundabout was built in the city of Waterloo and has been problematic. So we are constantly monitoring this intersection to identify what are the issues and try to do some interventions. So this is also in the context of developing countries, when actually even data doesn't exist, so it's quite efficient. So in this case, we are looking also for solutions, for instance, to protect pedestrians at intersections. So in this case, actually, it's a project that was led by the Inter-American Development Bank. So we are trying to evaluate some local solutions, as you can see in the image. So we are implementing some temporal solutions, and we want to evaluate before going to more permanent solutions, like curve extensions. We can evaluate that, and in question of weeks, determine what are the impacts and if it is working, so that even before installing permanent solutions, we can do some modifications, not just simply try to determine the impacts, the benefits of that. So I can give you many other examples, but probably I will just stop here. And so basically, I will just finish by saying that we are trying to help cities to build safer and smarter infrastructure, and using a proactive approach and automated video technologies. So thanks.
Thank you, Luis. And just to ask you a quick question after that, in terms of the cities, are you finding that they're coming to you looking for these solutions as they look at changes in the infrastructure in the cities, in the design of the cities, or as they are, or more in general with what's currently in place?
So actually, this can be used in the different stages of the process, of the traffic management process. So it can be used, the technology can be used to identify hazardous locations, intersections that actually are at high risk in a proactive way. We can use it as a tool for the diagnosis. So sometimes you don't know what are the issues and what are the potential treatments that you can implement. So it's just having a radiography, kind of going to the doctor and getting a radiography and try to figure out what is the problem in a much more detailed way. Once you do the treatments, you can evaluate what is the impact of the treatment. So these tools can be used in the different stages of the process.
Great. Thanks, Luis.
Traditionally they are just using accident data that takes, again, 4 to 6 years.
Great. Okay, good. And next we're going to have Claire Jones, Claire, as I mentioned earlier, is from What Three Words and spends her time traveling quite a lot. So she's going to tell us a little bit of what she's learned on her travels about What Three Words. Talk to us about, and I think it's something that we've just heard from Luis as well, on leapfrogging. I think this is what is important about technology and innovation, is that it offers us the opportunity, and also for emerging and developing cities, to leapfrog in terms of where they can be vis-a-vis what we can learn from. So what we're hearing from Luis is that we can look at things that haven't even happened yet and use that data, because we do not have historical data in some instances, use that data very, very quickly and make a change right now. So Claire is also going to talk about something that can be rolled out literally from today to tomorrow. So thank you, Claire.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Claire. I'm with What Three Words, and we basically wanted to do something a bit differently. So we wanted to think differently about something where we've been thinking the same way about addresses, like street addresses, for a couple of 100 years now. And we designed addresses a long time ago when we certainly didn't have mobile phones and autonomous vehicles. And so we figured it was time to think a bit differently about them. And there are lots of reasons that the existing addressing systems that we have around the world aren't quite good enough today. And some examples of that, well, there are lots of places in the world that don't have addresses at all. So if I wanted to tell you where the best spot was to put your tent to watch the sunset, it's very hard to explain exactly where this place is. It doesn't have a postal address, so how do I explain exactly where it is? Or maybe I like to find street art in cities. This is in LA, where you have some of the most amazing street art in the world. It's hard for me to explain exactly where on the side of a building you can find this street art, or maybe the best food in a street market, or if anyone's ever been to a festival, you know how much time you spend on the phone to each other trying to find places, trying to find the stage, trying to find the coffee, because it's very easy to get lost in places that don't have addresses. And I use Airbnb quite a lot. Basically what I've discovered is the more beautiful your Airbnb is, the more likely it is you're going to get lost trying to find it, because it's hidden in a mountain or in a forest. It's often very, very hard to find. So that's frustrating. And then even when we do have addresses, so thinking about cities like London, where we've got very advanced addressing systems, you have a problem like this, which is the pin in the middle of the building. So if you look up Harrods in London, there is one address for that building, and there are multiple entrances. That one address that pins in the middle gives me no information about where the pickup point is, where the drop-off point is, where the delivery is, where the valet parking might be. So I have one address and multiple entrances, and no way to explain exactly where I'm trying to go. And this is not a problem of maps. This is a problem of addresses. So this is consistent across any map, whether you're using a Google map, an Apple map, a TomTom map. It is not a problem of the maps themselves. It's a problem of the addressing system. And the other things that are wrong with addresses at the moment include the fact that basically we've made it really easy for human beings to make mistakes with addresses. So this example here, you can see here, there's a place in Iceland, something like Laugavegur. And there's another place in Iceland which is spelt very similarly. The only difference is one R in the middle. So you can see that the first one has an extra R versus the second one. Now, if you're typing into your GPS, or you're typing it into your car's GPS, and you make a mistake, you probably follow your GPS, because we've got very used to trusting these machines. And a poor American tourist drove 5 hours to the wrong side of Iceland because he mistyped this address when he was typing it into his car. So it's very easy to make mistakes with addresses, very easy to make a very small typo like this, Acacia versus Acadia, and go to the wrong side of town. Sometimes you have problems like this. So I was in Stuttgart recently, and I went to an Airbnb at 30 Plininger Straße. And unfortunately, there is another 30 Plininger Straße within 15 minutes, and my taxi driver and I surprised a poor lady who was not expecting an Airbnb guest. So it's easy for us to make mistakes, and this is true in London, where we've got 14 roads called Church Road, just in London. So it's really easy to make mistakes, and of course, now we've started using voice to talk to our machines, it's got worse. So when you're talking to your car, whether you're talking to your Amazon Alexa or your Google Home device, it's a serious problem, and this is because lots of words sound the same. So for example, 50 and 15, they sound quite similar to a human or even to a machine. Or you've got words like Ammanford. So you can see here, Ammanford Road. Now, Ammanford is a very poetic name for a street, but it's one that we have made up. So when you're trying to teach voice recognizers to understand these words, you're basically having to teach them every single street address, every single name of every street in every country, in every place in the entire world. So in Germany alone, you've got 400,000 unique street names. So you have to program them out into your voice if your voice recognized or if you're expecting it to understand you when you speak. So this is a problem. It's frustrating and it's expensive. So this is actually my old flat in London. If you look up 62 St. George's Way in a Google map, the pin is in the middle of the road, which is not actually where the entrance is. It's actually that kind of U-shaped building on the end. And this meant I was constantly complaining. And it's not just me, particularly we millennials, we like to complain. So people complain about their packages arriving late, their pizzas arriving cold, their Uber coming to the wrong place. So we're always complaining about addresses not doing the job they should. And it's probably about time for something a bit better. Now, of course, in the future, it becomes even more important that the addresses are right. So when you have an autonomous taxi collecting you, right now, when I have a person collecting me through my taxi or Uber, and we can't find each other, we phone each other, and I'll say something like, I'm wearing the pink skirt, I'm standing outside Starbucks, can you see me? That doesn't work quite so well when there's no driver. So it's about to become even more important that addresses are accurate. So all of those problems I talked about are in places like the US and the UK and Germany. Now, in the rest of the world, they may not even have addresses at all. So we take for granted in these countries that we will have an address for when we're calling an ambulance, when we're registering to vote, when we're talking to someone about where we live, or when we're ordering pizza. Now, most of the world actually looks a bit more like this. Amazing maps, very detailed maps with streets and everything on them, and even, you get to a satellite, you can get to building level. The problem is you can't get a street address from a satellite, so you have about 75% of the world that doesn't have addresses. So in this bit of the world, we have addresses that aren't quite good enough, they're frustrating, and in the rest of the world, you don't even have addresses at all. So we figured we should try and fix that. So we wanted to create a new system that was universal, so works everywhere in the world, whichever country you live in, and it should be designed for humans and machines. So for humans to tell their drone where to deliver a package, for humans to get into their car and tell their car where to go, or to invite someone to their house for a dinner party, or even to deliver aid. So what we did is we took this. Now, this is a universal addressing system. It's wonderful, it's unique. Everywhere in the world has a completely unique address, but the problem is it looks like this. So if my colleague Laura, who's here today with me, said to me, hi Claire, can we meet tomorrow at 25 degrees, 9 minutes, 40.918 seconds, etc. It's quite unlikely I'm going to end up in the right place. So we wanted to make this human-friendly. So what we did is we divided the entire globe into a grid of 57 trillion squares. Every single square is 3 meters by 3 meters, and every square has been labeled with an address made of 3 words from the dictionary. So you can see each of these squares is 3 meters by 3 meters, and every single one has a totally unique address. So I can tell you to come to our office in London at Index Home Raft. That's the 3-meter square of the front door of our office. This video has got stuck, but that square that car is about to drive into is a square in Germany, and I think it's Thread Stroller's Bumble. So every square in the entire world has a unique address. So you can see here, if I'm going to a stadium, every different entrance, every parking space has a completely unique address. If I want to tell you where the best vegetarian restaurant is in Kyoto, and you don't speak Japanese, this one on the left, I can give you the 3-word address in English or in German if you speak German. Or if I want to tell you where the best spot is to take a picture for Instagram of that particular dragon, that dragon is at Anoi's Trendy Cake in Kyoto in Japan. Everywhere in the world has a unique address. Behind the scenes, this is a GPS coordinate that converts these 3 words into a GPS coordinate so it can be used in any map, in any app, anywhere in the world. So we've done this so far in 26 languages, so you can use what 3 words in English, in French, in German, in Swahili. We're launching Chinese later this year, and we recently launched Korean and Thai as well, so we've been focused on Asia. We've done a few things to these addresses to make sure that it's easy for humans. So we've put common words where people live. Words like table, chair, and lamps will be in towns and cities where people live. Words like deconstructs will be in the middle of the sea where no one lives. We've also created an error detection piece part of this. So for example, you can see here, when I was typing in the address, I made the mistake. Now, I was in London when I typed this in, and I missed off the first letter. Now, it knew I was trying to go to Toffee Branch Pyramid, not Coffee Branch Pyramid, because Toffee Branch Pyramid is in London, and Coffee Branch Pyramid is in India. So similar combinations are so far apart that you never make a mistake. So unlike Acadia Drive and Acacia Drive, if I make a mistake, it's immediately clear, and I never go to the wrong place. So I can tell you that this parking space is at Spicy Float Monday, and this parking space is at Pirate Gather Daisy. So everywhere in the world has an address. We have a piece of code that lets you build this into things, and we're used all over the world in all kinds of ways, from delivery companies to passenger vehicles to ride-sharing apps. I love seeing travel guides around the world giving people three-word addresses of restaurants and places they might want to visit, hotels listing three-word addresses so you can find their front door, and even these days Airbnb hosts so you don't get lost like I did with your Airbnb. And then once someone's given me this address, I can put it into a sat-nav app, I can put it into a car. Mercedes-Benz were the first cars to bring this in natively to their cars. So starting with their A-Class, you can get into your Mercedes, you can say, "Hey Mercedes," with your voice, and ask it to take you to Count Bikes Thank, and that is the exact 3 meter square that you're trying to get to. Other car companies are coming along as well. This is Jaguar Land Rover have also used this in an off-roading app. If you're taking your Jaguar Land Rover off-road, you can imagine there might not be many street names, so you can use it. So that's been fascinating to see. And one of the things we're looking at is, of course, autonomy. So this is a project that's really interesting. This is the Accessible Ollie project in the US. So we're working with Local Motors and their autonomous shuttle, because one of the things that's important with autonomy is thinking about how, and we heard this in the beginning, of thinking about inclusive cities and accessible cities. And one of the great things about voice technology is if you're visually impaired, you might not be able to drive. Well, once you have an autonomous vehicle, you can start to use vehicles like everyone else, but you might want to use your voice. So What 3 Words was designed for voice control. Or maybe if you're in a wheelchair, you'd like to get to a wheelchair entrance of a building rather than the entrance that everybody else goes to with the steps up. So we're working with Local Motors and IBM Watson to make sure that their accessible autonomous shuttles have What 3 Words inside as well. And one of the things Sharon mentioned, which I think is really interesting, is that we've designed this system a while ago. You guys can download the app right now and look up the addresses of anywhere in the world, your front door, your back door, your favourite spot on the beach. And we've now got 9 governments around the world where this has been adopted as an official addressing system. So that actually the first one was Mongolia. So the government of Mongolia, now this was before Mercedes-Benz put it in their vehicles. So this is the thing that's really fascinating to me about leapfrogging, that there are countries in the world where innovation is happening, and it doesn't always happen from Silicon Valley outwards. Sometimes it happens in other directions. So I love the fact that Mongolia was the first country in the world to adopt What 3 Words as an official addressing system. And now we're seeing it used all over the world, in Germany, in the US, the UK. But it's really amazing to see countries like Mongolia innovating, creating smarter cities, thinking about, instead of sticking with something that everyone designed a few hundred years ago, they said, nope, we're going to skip straight ahead, we're going to use a technology-enabled solution. So that's amazing to see all around the world, people using it to make deliveries in places like Kenya. And, you know, we're talking about cities of the future. We should be thinking about cities like Nairobi, cities like Lagos as well when we're designing solutions for the future. And this is a picture of a bus stop in Ulaanbaatar. So every bus stop in the capital city of Mongolia, of Ulaanbaatar, now has a 3 word address in English and in Mongolian. This is an art gallery in Paris. So Tables Empty Workshops is both the name and the address of the art gallery in Paris. So go and say hello to them if you're in Paris. And this is actually the HQ of Deutsche Bahn in Berlin. So if you go to the HQ of Deutsche Bahn in Berlin, you'll see their German 3-word address sign written on their window. So I'm sure you'll see these 3-word addresses appearing everywhere. We're very excited to see where this is going and to see it being adopted as a universal addressing system. So that's What 3 Words.
Great. Thanks very much, Claire. That was very, very interesting, and I think a great example of, you know, what technology can bring and how it can be rolled out straight away. And of course, we've spoken about the opportunities for this in transport, but also for humanitarian purposes. I think this is something that's very, very interesting and very, very important, that we can actually locate someone in a 3 square meter area for road breakdowns in terms of road safety, etc., for areas that do not necessarily have an address. Just a question I wanted to ask you, as you spoke about technology and deliveries. In terms of drones, what are you planning on that? Are you thinking of that? As we can imagine into the future, maybe our pizza is delivered into our window in our apartments. What's What 3 Words doing on that?
Yeah, so I think with What 3 Words, it's the human-friendly way to specify a coordinate. So a drone needs a coordinate. It's not, you can't give a drone a zip code or a postcode or a pin in the middle of a building. It'll go to the wrong place. And so with What 3 Words, it's a very simple way for you to specify, you know what, the square in my back garden where I want the drone to drop my package, the safe place in my garden or the doorstep of my door, it allows you to be that accurate. So you can simply say, using your voice, maybe you say to your Amazon Alexa, hey, bring my Amazon package to Apple Banana Spoon. It's the really, really simple way to communicate. So as we look at these technologies of the future, it's not just about designing them so that the machines do a brilliant job. We've got to think about how the humans are going to interact with those machines.
Okay, and just another quick question. As we talk about the efforts to get to a certain place, and I know What 3 Words was set up by Chris Sheldrick, who looked at it from a music perspective in terms of what entrance can we get the musicians into this very, very big venue. But people lose a lot of time just driving around looking for things. And have you looked at the sustainability angle on this and what you can actually gain from using a very accurate system like this?
Absolutely. So that's something we're really interested in as a team is what you can do with What 3 Words to drive efficiency and, yeah, therefore, work on climate change efforts. And so an example of that would be in London. We did a test with a courier company, and they found that in the last mile, using a 3-word address, which gets you to a door or an entrance, rather than a street address, was about 30% more efficient. And that, yes, I mean, firstly, that means you're spending less time driving around. It might mean you're spending less time driving the wrong way and having to go around a one-way system and drive for 20 minutes to get back to the right place. It also means often not stopping the van, getting out, discovering you're in the wrong place, starting the van, getting the van back up, and then going out again. So what you're able to see is by these, there may be a small efficiency gain in the last mile if you're saving 2 minutes on a drop, but if you're doing 1 million deliveries a week and you're saving 2 minutes on every one of those, you're getting time savings and money savings, and hopefully, helping a sustainability strategy as well.
Great. Thanks very much, Claire. And our next speaker is Philip van Hagen. So welcome, Philip. And we're looking forward to hearing more about what Porsche SE is doing, and also on, so Philip is responsible for the investment with Porsche SE, so it has a great background in looking at startups and what they can bring, and certainly now in the mobility sector, as we see. I mean, I met Philip for the first time at the Web Summit in Lisbon. As I mentioned earlier, now I think that transport really does have a platform, and everywhere you go, no matter what technology conference it is, transport has a huge role and a huge place on the stage. So I think we need to embrace that. We need to look at why is that right now and how can we capitalize on that. Thanks, Philip.
Thank you, Sharon. Good morning, everyone. Just by way of small addition to what Sharon just said, and to avoid any confusion, Porsche SE does not manufacture Porsche cars, so that will disappoint many of you. We are, however, the largest shareholder in VW. We hold the majority of the voting stock in VW, and VW owns, amongst the VW brand and the Audi brand, the Porsche brand, as well as many others, including trucks and buses. When it comes to mobility and innovation in mobility, the theme of this morning's talk, I just want to go back in time, because mobility is a fundamental human desire. We all want to be mobile, and it's inspired innovation for a very long time. The wheel was invented 5,500 years ago or so. Public transportation, which is very important for efficiency, was invented 350 years ago with horse-drawn carriages on a fixed schedule, fixed prices, etc. And mobility is a very important driver of prosperity and the wealth, the creation of wealth in nations. There's plenty of scientific evidence for that. So when it comes to innovation around mobility today, we need to ask the question, why is it so different from all the innovations we've had in the past? We had an industrial revolution already in the 18th century. That's when steam in particular helped mechanize production. In the 19th century, we had electric power that allowed mass production and the creation of the combustion engine and hence cars. And then we had the third industrial revolution only some 50 years ago with the introduction of computers, and that allowed automation, robotics, and mass production in a more intelligent way. And the fourth industrial revolution builds on all of these, and in particular on the third industrial revolution, and it's a fusion of technologies. It breaks down barriers between the physical, the digital, and even the biological spheres. So there are no historic precedents for this industrial revolution. Previous industrial revolutions have taken a long time. This one has no precedence in terms of the velocity, the scope, and the systems impact we're seeing today. It is very fast. It is exponential, and this is what we often hear about, exponential or disruptive innovations. Entire production systems and business models are being disrupted with new ideas like the ones that Claire's just mentioned, thinking things differently, but also being able to implement them because the tools are there. And this is the next point I'm trying to highlight here. What are the driving forces behind making this possible, this fourth industrial revolution? And there are three themes. One is the macro trends behind this and predictions about the future. The second are exponential technologies, and the third are exponential economic mechanisms. Coming to the first, well known to most of you, so I won't spend much time on that, but there's massive population growth. It is slowing, as we know. Population has grown very fast over the past couple of decades. It's slowing down, but we still add 2 billion to the 7 billion people over the next couple of decades, and most of them will go into cities. We have the challenges of climate change. We have resource scarcity, and we have the growth of networks through the Internet of Things, as well as strong financial growth in some areas and challenged finances in others, and the political conditions that relate to that. More importantly now for this theme are the exponential technologies that enable the fourth industrial revolution. We have artificial intelligence and computer vision. That is what Luis, for instance, talked about earlier. We have biotech and synthetic biology. We have robotics, embedded sensors, miniaturization, as well as augmented and mixed reality, and additive, decentralized, low-cost manufacturing. And lastly, we can even program matter to change shape in certain conditions. The third element of exponential mechanisms are economic ones. They are mainly the digitalization we've been talking about for many decades already, but it's also crowd thinking and crowdsourcing of ideas. It's the demediation, it's cutting out the middlemen. We no longer need the middleman. We all have a smartphone and can summon a service without having an intermediary. Demonetization, that is cutting down the costs of doing things. 3D printers are now available for home use. They used to cost $1 million. And there's a radical drop in the price or cost of certain enablers such as cloud computing and the like. The fifth aspect is deception. These are invisible mechanisms, invisible exponentials. To give you one example, blockchain. Blockchain has not been known to most of you, I would have thought, but suddenly, all of a sudden, over the past couple of months or over the past year, it's become very prominent through some very interesting developments in the currency area. But blockchain is a lot more than that, and it's an invisible mechanism, and suddenly it's there and it's hitting you. And you need to see how you deal with it. And lastly, there's the shift from large corporations to small collectives. Things can get done and executed by a very small number of people. Look at the impact also of Claire's technology on the global population. It's very few people having a major impact. So what does that mean for the mobility ecosystem? We are faced with massive challenges today in terms of sustainability. Again, everybody, I guess, in this room knows about them. I talked about the population growth, the scarce and the cramped, crowded, and stressed infrastructure, and the need for individuals to have access to transportation, safe, reliable, affordable, equitable access to transportation. Now, a lot of those problems could, in theory at least, be solved already today with the technologies that are available. And the massive game changer in all of this is connectivity. Connectivity allows, for the first time, to connect different stakeholders. It allows to connect infrastructure. It allows to connect mobile assets, that is cars, trains, buses, bicycles, and of course the users, us, with the infrastructure and the mobile assets. And as such, it gives us the power to solve for massive inefficiencies in the mobility ecosystem. So what does that mean from a city perspective for innovation, and where does innovation come to bear, where is it needed? Now, in order to assess that, we clustered 3 city types around the world, which are distinctly different and will also require different innovation approaches or approaches to innovation in the context. The first city type you will mainly find in Asia. Those are centrally governed megacities, and their societal model is one where the good of the many is prioritized. And so infrastructure and services are designed for the many, and that's what we call efficient collectivism. An example of this might be in China, Guangzhou. The second cluster of cities are those that you often find in the Western world, societies driven by competition and meritocracy, cities that want to develop strong identities to attract talent and investors. People want personalized experiences, they want to self-optimize, and they're full of different cultures and values. And in those cities, it is all about the effectiveness of individuals. And thirdly, we have areas such as Lagos or Delhi. Those are areas where the level of organization is very low. Scarcity of resources leads to hyper-local, DIY-led solutions. And for each of these, we need a different approach. So when we look at the solutions in the mobility system, we also move away from looking at the traditional value chain. Car makers look at the value chain of the research and development, and then the production and the marketing, etc. When you look at the technology ecosystem, you look at a stack, you look at layers, and this is what we've also done from a mobility perspective. And when you want to then apply this to the city types, you will see what the entry points are for innovation and where the highest demand is for new services. And in the areas of efficient collectivism, you come, for instance, mainly for the infrastructure component with the cities themselves, whereas in the Western world, where it's all about effectiveness of individuals, you come for the service layer, for instance. And in the areas of overburdened sprawl, you really need to apply innovation at every single level, but probably also mainly in the assembly and the R&D arena. Now, the question that also is part of the sort of title of this panel is, there's a lot of startups in the ecosystem. So is all the innovation going to come from startups? And I've earlier laid out the foundations of enabling small companies, individuals like Louis, like Claire, to come up with disruptive innovations in the ecosystem. And that has much to do with the fact that large corporates are simply set up to develop things in a linear fashion. They don't like to take massive risks. And it's also a numbers game. You can have 1,000 people trying to innovate, and one of them will be successful. Now, you can't necessarily replicate that inside an organization. So you do get exponential innovations very often outside your organization. And to quote Bill Joy, the founder of Sun Microsystems, he also pointed out that no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. Now, that suggests that you really need that external innovation to drive things forward. But we have to remember most bad ideas are also outside one's organization. So the question is actually, how can we innovate? Is it all outside our large established corporates, or is it inside? Or how can we make it work better? And there are three elements I like to touch on. The first is you need to provide access to information. We talked, for instance, also about, Robin talked about open data, very important. And the skills, access to skills. Now, thanks to, for instance, video conferencing, we can have people scattered around the globe, but bring their skill sets together to bear in one place. Secondly, you need to balance risks and rewards. Corporates are risk averse very often, and the rewards are often very high when you do succeed, and this is where venture capital often comes in, because they have a portfolio approach and they can take those risks of making 10 investments or 100 investments, and then half of them not working out and only a handful succeeding, but for them it is still over the portfolio a very good result. This is very hard for corporates. Nevertheless, we need both. And corporates also invest vast amounts of money in innovation and have a lot of experience. We see in the car space, for instance, that it is not that easy to get serial production up and running properly at scale. It does require a lot of experience, and manufacturers such as VW Group, they're investing 34 billion euros over the next 5 years in new solutions around electrification and connectivity. So we need more cooperation between the internal inventors in a company, the internal innovation, as well as the external innovation. Now, what does that mean for policymakers and policies? The rapid innovation we are seeing is creating new challenges. And those challenges, for instance, relate to the sharing, and Robin touched upon some of that when she suggested that sharing actually brings more people out in the street. More people start to become mobile. Now, that creates challenges. Sharing operators take traffic, and there are studies, empirical evidence to support that. Car sharing providers also take traffic out of the public transportation system, out of the infrastructure that is designed for mass transportation. And so we need to manage those negative externalities. And in order to do that, we first of all need to define what our social and political objectives are. And this is, for instance, what the software solutions from PTV enable policymakers to do, a company that we recently acquired. And thirdly, governance models need to be adapted to encourage innovation in the public sector. So what do I mean by that? We need to move away from the reactive approaches of policy making, of observing certain developments and then fixing the problems afterwards, or being too prescriptive, on the other hand, of not allowing certain things, which is also stopping innovation from happening. So what we need is really some guiding principles that are adaptive and facilitate innovation. And we need to do so in a holistic sense. We need to engage all stakeholders, that is the public as well as the private, academia as well as society, because innovation in the age of the fourth industrial revolution is technology that transcends boundaries and will redefine the boundaries of traditional industries. And so we need a clear set of rules to protect the public interest and maintain a level playing field that encourages innovation in the ecosystem. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Philip. Just a quick question. I think it's very important. We've spoken about the dynamics now and the changing dynamics. And how do you think policymakers, because at the end of the day, this is a conference for policymakers, I think it would be important for them to know how they should position themselves. Do you have any advice for them, what they should be looking at right now, and how we can break down those barriers to get everybody working together?
Yeah, the speed of the innovation is incredibly fast, and it's a challenge also for corporates. Policymakers need to take into account a lot more stakeholders, their voters, their electorate, the public, and are often even slower in adapting to change than corporates are. And so this is a fundamental challenge. At the same time, I like to encourage policymakers to consider opening up their systems to what I would call guiding principles, so being not too prescriptive, stopping things from happening and innovation to be deployed, but also to being then too restrictive on the other hand, and reactive to the problems that are created through innovations. So having a set of guiding principles and then over time also refine those principles. That's important. The second aspect, and we discussed that already earlier this morning, what we see is still very, very closed ecosystems between the policymaker community, between the tech community, between the corporate world in their respective verticals. And we need to break down those barriers also in communication and dialogue and bring each party to the table. Whilst this has been happening in the past, it's not been happening from a technology mindset. And this is, I think, where we can do better.
That's great. Thank you, Philip. So I think that's an interesting question, and I'd just like to offer the opportunity to the rest of the speakers in the panel if they'd like to answer that question about policymakers. Any advice for policymakers on what they think, what you think that they should take note of?
Why, yes. I did write down, is it working? Yes. 3 things that I thought were like 3 takeaways is that we need to look at existing regulations. I feel like every government should be reassessing its existing regulations and looking at how it has regulations that don't make sense anymore given today's technology, regulations that are preferencing outdated modes or outdated ideas.
And I realize that's an incredible challenge, but just as a quick example of that, in New York City, when Uber first came in, it was banned because, this is in 2012, it was banned because to use a taxi, you had to use this specific device to measure distance. GPS was not an allowable device in the regulations. So just as an example of our incredibly outdated ancient ones. Number two was that I really want to encourage you to do the politically difficult thing and to start right pricing vehicle use. And it has to get done before self-driving cars come in, because self-driving cars will make things so much cheaper that if it's already cheap today, it's going to just, all those issues are going to be magnified. And the third was to really think hard about open data standards and encouraging them, and I realize it's kind of an industrial piece, but to be very, very open to open data standards, that's a requirement for innovation. It's a feedstock for innovation, and so those open data standards are critical.
Great. Thank you, Robin. Luis?
Yes, probably.
Should be okay. Yeah.
So I will say that regarding road safety and the feeling which we are working on, certainly technologies will be or are actually being quite disruptive, in the sense that we are now able to do analysis in the case of safety that will take a few weeks instead of years. And that actually will have some big implications, and it's already having some big implications in the current practice, in the guidance, in the manuals that we're using still to improve road safety. Engineers still, we are using manuals that are developed based on methodologies that require years of data. So now with these new approaches, with the innovations that we are making, all these manuals, all these guidelines will be transformed, and actually obviously the cities will benefit, because now we will improve safety, our roads, in a much more efficient way, in a much faster way. So innovation will help so that the solutions, the benefits of the technologies actually will be expressed, will be demonstrated quite fast.
Thanks, Luis. Claire?
I think for me, one of the things would be hire digital natives, hire young people who grew up with technology. For me, like they might not be young, but hire people who love technology and who love software. I think for us, we do a lot of work with governments, but also a lot with very big corporates, and I think they're very similar in lots of ways. And my example of this is when we first started talking to car companies, to OEMs. I remember my first phone call with a car company, someone who could put this in their cars, and they said, "Claire, we love this. This is amazing. This is totally the future. We'd like to do it really soon." This is probably 2015. "We'd like to do it really soon." And I was like, "Great, are we talking like months?" And they said, "Oh no, by 2020. And I said, like 2020, like the year 2020? Because on our timescale, that's worlds away. And then actually, where we've ended up recently is we're now engaged with OEMs, and last year we worked with Mercedes. Within 6 months, it was in series production. So it's a piece of software. Within 6 months, they had it in a car. So it is possible to innovate fast. I think, but the difference is finding the right people. And one example, actually, in the government world this week, I got this amazing message, actually, through social media from someone who said, "Hi, Claire, I've been aware of What Through Words for a while. I've just been promoted to be the Chief Innovation Officer of a country." So firstly, love that as a thing. And he said, "I've just been promoted. I report directly to the president. We want to use What Through Words. I've got 10 ideas. Here they are. Can you just call me and we can talk?" And immediately my colleague got in touch with him, she runs all of our work with governments, and she said, after speaking to him, she said to me, "It was amazing. I didn't need to explain it. He'd watched everything online. He knew exactly what it was. He had 10 ideas for his country particularly and their particular situation about how this could be useful." So having people like that, people whether they're in OEMs or whether they're in big government organizations, people who are digitally native, who are excited by technology, who are willing to think a bit differently and to come to you and think of solutions, those are the people that we love working with as a startup.
Great, thanks, Claire. So now I think we'll open for questions from the audience. I'm sure you have some questions for some of our speakers here. Does anyone have a question? Yeah, we have a question. Do we have a microphone? Yep. Just up. And maybe please just introduce yourself as well. Thank you.
My name is Christian Drakuc from the Austrian Ministry of Transport, Innovation and Technology. I have two brief questions. One to the presentation, what three words? Actually, you need a kind of translational device, because this is not really telling. If I have just these three words, I always have to look it up and then figure where it is all around and how to get there, practically speaking. Did you think about this problem of usability, and what is your advice? If, for instance, just to give an example, if you're looking for a little cafe and it's next to the cathedral of a certain city, then I might figure out where it is. If you just tell me like that, if you give me three words, I'm completely lost. I don't know what to do with that. And the other is about the video imaging of data processing of near misses and so. Do you have a way to distinguish between deliberate risky maneuvers on the one hand, so intentionally accidental behavior, so to say, and accidental near misses? Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for the question. So What Three Words was designed for the case where you have a human and a machine. So it absolutely needs a machine to translate those three words into a GPS coordinate so you can get directions there. It was only designed for cases where you have a human communicating to a machine, or a human to a human and then to a machine. So it's designed only for the case where you do have a device, and that device might be a smartwatch or a car or a phone or an Amazon Alexa Echo. But either way, you have to have that device. The idea for us is that, look, we're designing for those cases where people are typing addresses into things. And that's what we do. It's what we do when we put in a destination to Uber. It's what we do when we order something online. So it was designed purely at that particular interface. If you're not using a machine, then you don't use What Three Words. You can use the walk halfway around the cathedral and look for the statue. But if you've got a machine, that's where What Three Words was designed for.
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks. This is a quite interesting question. Actually, we are able to identify if the driver or one of the road users is doing some maneuvers or is trying to react. So, for instance, in a situation with a vehicle and a pedestrian, we are able to determine if the driver is decelerating, or the cyclist or the pedestrian is trying to do a maneuver so that it avoid the collision. Obviously, we don't know if in some situations where the driver don't stop, when he doesn't yell to the pedestrian, for instance, we don't know if it's because he doesn't want to yell or it is because he doesn't see the pedestrian. So this is something that unfortunately we are not able to see what is inside the vehicle, right? What is, yeah, we are looking at just everything from outside the vehicle. Obviously we are also looking at other situations when the driver or the road user is making some violation, like for instance a red light violation, or is not respecting certain rules. That we are able to do. But what is inside the vehicle, yeah, we are not able to do. I know that there are some technology that we are starting to explore, but it's dashed cameras from inside the vehicle, in which we can also see what the driver is doing, but that is still not part of our solutions. But that will be possible certainly in the future.
Have we any more questions? Yes?
So it's Giles Bailey from Strategy of Consulting in the UK. It's a particular question for Claire, but I think it applies to the other groups, the other panelists as well. I'm just interested in your reaction from large organizations about reform as opposed to adopting something as radical as What Three Words, particularly, well, I suppose in the Postal Service. You know, was there much of a debate of, well, this is interesting, but we could do so much more with postal addresses to kind of capture the essence of what you're trying to do? And how do you kind of balance that debate between reform versus complete radical new solutions?
Yeah, actually, what we've seen is because those organisations have such a pain point, in the postal example, postal services around the world that have adopted this, they have such a pain point because most of their countries just don't have addresses. It's really complicated, it's really expensive to roll out street addressing programs. And look, we would love it if people had street addresses as well. We're not trying to say this is the only way you should ever talk to anyone about location. But for them, because they basically have an option which is spend millions and millions of pounds addressing every street, teaching everyone, making a zip code system and a postcode system and all the rest of it, which they may well still want to do for other reasons. And then they have a piece of technology which exists today on mobile phones with an app that they can download in 2 minutes and look up the address of literally anywhere in their country. I think that's the reason that they are willing to embrace something that seems actually really radical. I mean, the Mongolia government example is an amazing one because they came to us. So at one point, the Postal Service was doing things a bit differently. They were shaking up things a bit, and they came to us and they were like, guys, we hadn't done Mongolian as a language by that point. They were like, guys, we need this. We need this like yesterday. Can you come? Can you make a Mongolian version and give us a Mongolian language version, and we'd like to use it. And for them, it answered such a problem that they were willing to go, yeah, this sounds a little bit crazy. Yes, it does feel strange that you're asking me to come to this future where I get a wedding invitation and it says banana dragon daisy on it, and everyone knows what that means. But because it's so painful, and that's true if you're a government, a postal service, it's true if you're a delivery company when you waste loads of time, it's true if you're a car company where no one uses this amazing navigation system you've built in your car because they just find it easier to just type something into their phone. So many pain points that we find generally the right kind of people who are open to new ideas are willing to do it, even though it's pretty radical.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah.
Claire, so when I'm the postman and the 3 words are all typed in, is there the, what do they call it, the traveling salesman's problem? Do you tell him or her, follow this route, and now I'll get out my phone to get the last bit?
So it depends on the way the system's set up. If it's a really digitally enabled system, so in Switzerland, for example, you have a really digitally enabled system and everything's like automated sorting and automated routing and so on. And in other countries, no, I mean, it will involve the last mile, might involve a mobile phone. It depends on the system, but basically, an example of this would be you can scan any letter using a mobile phone app we've made for postal services. They scan it. It will then automatically convert that to a GPS coordinate. It will give the postman or postwoman a route for their day, and they know where they're delivering. And yes, they get their phone out for the last mile, so they might know the general area because they deliver in the city a lot. And they get to the general area, they then get their phone out for the last mile, and they get a directions in their phone to that door.
Thank you. And I know we have some more questions at the back.
More than a question, it's a comment. Is this on? Yes, I'm Esteban Diaz from the Inter-American Development Bank. We worked with Luis's company in Cochabamba, as he mentioned. And I'd like to highlight 2 points there. One, how useful this is in developing countries. Specifically when, for example, when we design intersections in the developing world, we tend to use manuals from the developed world. And human behavior is very different in one place from another. So the fact that we have the information from Cochabamba, you don't really have to analyze each single intersection, but you can use the information from one to develop standards to design other intersections. The other point I wanted to make is that sometimes this has policy implications that goes, for example, way beyond road safety. And Luis, correct me if I'm wrong, one thing that we noticed in the Cochabamba case is that drivers behave differently towards different people. And unfortunately, one thing that was identified is they tended to have more aggressive behavior towards indigenous women. In Bolivia, they have a special way of dressing with broad skirts and little bowler hats. And that's sad, but that also has policy implications and things that from just studying road safety, we found out something very different that we want to change.
Yep. So actually, these are quite interesting points related to how this can help developing countries, in particularly the case, for instance, that I was presenting of Cochabamba. So there are different ways that we are trying to help. First of all, there is no crash data that we can use to evaluate interventions. And even that we have the data, it will take a few years to do a before and after. So in the case of Cochabamba, what we are looking at is at low-cost interventions that can be implemented. And the way to go, or the way we are trying to go, is through pilot projects. So we select strategically a few intersections. We do a diagnosis to identify what are those intersections that are the most dangerous. So we have different groups of intersections that are signalized, intersections, roundabouts, and so on and so forth. So in each of these groups, we select those that we found in the first round through the video analytics as most dangerous, and then they were treated. So then we implemented treatments that actually were not permanent treatments, and we were able to see, it works, it doesn't work. In the case, for instance, of roundabouts, we found that it didn't work. The crosswalks are so long, the crossing distance are so long that actually small interventions wouldn't work. So you need a much more important geometry change to reduce the speeds. The speeds are too high. In the case of small intersections, signalized intersections, some of these simple interventions, we found that they have some benefits, immediate benefits. And obviously, safety will be improved partially from the road changes, road geometry changes, but there is a behavioral aspect. But also, we have found more and more through research as well that we can improve the behavior of road users by providing them better designs. So obviously, we are not going to fully address the problem, the behavioral problem through the design, but we can improve the road behavior in any country, in any society, but providing better road designs. So this is the first point. And the way we are trying to do it is by testing, right? So these cities are willing to test things that we are already using in developed countries, but for them to test them in a traditional way, as we are doing here in developed countries, could take many years. Right? So by using this technology and this approach of making pilots and being able to immediately see what are the impacts, actually we can accelerate the process. And related to the second question, so obviously it has to go with the whole package, right? Again, geometry changes, improvements in the roads will have an impact, but we will have to work with policies, with education and enforcement. So we are actually trying also to do a pilot study in which we are evaluating behaviors. So these tools will help us to evaluate not only our changes on geometry, but also enforcement. For instance, if you put a police or you do some education in a crosswalk to teach people to be more respectful of each other. So these technologies can also help you to measure what is the impacts of these educational or these policies that actually can be implemented.
Thanks, Luis. And I think we had one more question just from this table down at the back, did we? Yeah, this lady down here.
Hello, my name is Veronika Plietz from KfW, the German financial cooperation entity. And I have one question to Claire, which might be not the most important point of your impressing technology, but how do we make sure that people are happy with the dress they are, just
I love
imposed
this question.
on? So empty tables, crazy, might not be the best address a restaurant wants to have.
Yeah.
That's my first question. And another question directed to Robin. I would love to hear more on this impressive project in Seoul. And first of all, I would love to know how long did it take to transform this crazy highway into a pedestrian-friendly zone, and which obstacles did they have to overcome to create this space? Thank you.
Yes, thanks for the question. So every time we launch a language, so the languages are not translations of each other. So if you have a square that's apple, banana, spoon in English, it won't be the translation in French or Swahili. And every single word in our list, so we need 40,000 words to make 57 trillion squares. That actually gives you 64 trillion combinations to use. We did that in English. In other languages, we only did 25,000 words because that's the landmass of the world. So we didn't do the ocean in other languages. But every single word on this list of 25,000 words has been seen by multiple linguistic experts. And they've looked at the word and they've said, firstly, I do not find this word offensive. So we've taken out swear words and things like that. I'd be happy for this to be on my house. So you've done a level of filtering, and we've basically custom made this dictionary according to lots of different rules. And then you feed it to the algorithm and you end up with combinations. Now, of course, we need 25,000 words, so not all the words are going to be beautiful, bright, happy. You're going to have other words. So for example, my old house had the word slug. So I had slug, vines, bucket. Now, I quite liked that. I enjoyed it. It was funny. It used to make me laugh to say it. But if I didn't like it, because the squares are so small, they're 3 meters by 3 meters, I could have just gone one square over. It was still my doorstep, but that one was walk zest beans. So the idea is if you don't like it, unless you live in a 3 meter by 3 meter house, you probably can have a few squares to choose from to choose the one you like the best.
Thanks, Claire. Robin?
Probably was more for me. The question about the transformation of streets to make them pedestrian friendly. Obviously, the answer will be depends a lot of the city. Cities actually move in a different speed. And I have some experience from some Canadian cities that actually now are quite proactive in transforming some downtown areas into much more pedestrian-friendly zones. And certainly they have been facing some challenge. For instance, in the case of Montreal, we have built 800 kilometers of bicycle infrastructure and many kilometers of also pedestrian streets in the last few years. But obviously at the beginning, or still in some cases, even the same citizens are actually against some of the projects. And one of the things that actually is quite important for being able to get the acceptance from everyone is, first of all, to evaluate the impacts, right? To show to the public that, if you build a pedestrian street, if you convert a regular street to a pedestrian zone, or you build a bicycle facility, you take parking space, you remove a vehicle lane, so you are taking capacity for the vehicle. So the first thing is to show that people is using it and actually has some positive impacts, right? If you show them, like the volumes of pedestrians, the volumes of bikes are growing dramatically, or like in the case of safety, if you are showing them that actually safety is improving dramatically through these new technologies that we are able to evaluate immediately the impacts. So this is quite important, right? So that once the citizens and the government realize that actually things are working, so they are willing to accept much better. But I think the message here is to build evidence, which is sort of what we are trying to do now. We are transforming our cities, but at the same time we have to build evidence so that we can inform the general public and integrate even also the opinions into this process. And obviously the other thing is that when we are innovating in the design of the urban space, we can also go through these kind of new concepts in which we don't do interventions that are quite fixed. So we do some interventions that actually we can test and we can modify easily, and actually we can evaluate again through different technologies what are the impacts. And once through these pilot projects we are able to identify what is the right solution, we can do in a much more a permanent way to implement the changes.
Great. Thanks very much, Luis. And thank you to all of the panelists here today, to Philip, to Robin, Luis, and Claire. And thank you to you, the audience, for all of your great questions. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the summit and gets to see a lot of the sessions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
guest country ministers, on behalf of the Latvian presidency to the ITF, I'm delighted to greet all the distinguished participants who have traveled from all regions of the world to be present at this important annual event and to discuss our common goal, ensuring safe and secure movement of our people and goods. The issue of safety and security have been before transport planners and managers for many years and will maintain its top position in the priority list also in the future. We all, our families and friends, are part of the transportation system, and this makes us personally aware how important it is to ensure a safe and secure multimodal transportation system that is resilient to natural or man-made hazards. I would like to thank sincerely the ministers for consensus in adopting the Declaration on Safety and Security in Transport in order to seek understanding how to address these challenges: safety for sustainable and inclusive road and rail transport, security of passenger transport, safe, secure and resilient transport systems, innovation and new technologies for a safer and more secure transport. The adoption of the Declaration shows our commitment and willingness to join forces for greater good. I wish us all fruitful discussions, sharing of valuable experiences and best practices. I am confident that we will hear today, and what we will hear today would provide good food for thought in designing the future of our transportation systems.
Good morning, everyone. Once again, I welcome you all to Leipzig, and I think it was an excellent start from yesterday, and we are still enjoying our excellent journey together. And I think this session is really an important platform where we can meet together, especially private sector and public sector, and members and non-members of ITF, to create synergies, to exchange information, and etc. So I think this is the direction in which we have to move forward, and we will move forward, we should move forward. So thank you once again, and we will enjoy our fruitful conversation for the next 1 hour and 30 minutes.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, and thank you very much also to the Latvian Presidency State Secretary Ozolins. Good morning, Excellencies, delegates, and guests, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Melinda Crane, Political Chief Correspondent at the Deutsche Welle, and it is my great honor to accompany you this morning as moderator and to facilitate an exchange that is aimed at promoting the kind of discussion and cooperation that your declaration published this morning so emphatically supports. Cooperation that's aimed at ensuring that transport infrastructure and operations are safe, secure, and resilient to disruptions of all kinds, from terrorism to natural disasters. In the next hour and 25 minutes, we will explore some of the elements of resilience that are mentioned in your declaration and also were briefly addressed just now by the State Secretary and the Secretary General. We're going to focus in particular on opportunities for better